So outputting something changed is not our goal. Let's dive into the official documentation of React Native and let's scroll down. We got all these components here. So let's finally use some of them and let's do more than just outputting views and text. I explained that you have to work with these, that you can't use the web elements like divs and so on, but of course we have more than text and view. So let's say we want to handle some user input and create a new item. By the end of the course, our app will be about storing places users like, with images and a position on the map. We're not entirely there yet, but we already can allow the user to enter the name of a place and add a button to then store this and maybe output a list of these places. That sounds like a good start. For this, I'll keep that view, which has this container style attached, and I'll dive into the style here soon. But I will replace the text. And I want to replace it with a text input component. That simply is the React Native solution to handling user input, the alternative to the web input component basically. So let's import that from React Native. It's called Textinput with a capital T and a capital I. And then you simply add it here, text input like this. It's a self-closing tag because we don't put anything between opening and closing tags. The question just is, how do we configure text input? Well, you can always dive into the docs for this. And I'm not saying this because I'm lazy, but because React Native is all about you exploring the different options you have and working with the components you need for your application. Therefore, you need to be able to work with the docs. So let's click on text input here. And there you see a summary of text input. You see how it works. You see that you can use onChange text to react to changes to the text. And if you scroll down, you not only see some examples, by the way, interactive examples, which you can edit right here, but you will also see that you get a list of all the props this text input has. So this shows you how you may configure it. By the way, you sometimes in the documentation also see props or events which are annotated with Android or iOS, as you can see here. And this means that you can set these values, but they will only work if the app runs on the platform which is specified here. So here you can set up some settings that will only take effect on Android because iOS doesn't support them. The majority of the props here run on both devices, on both platforms though. So what we can learn from this documentation here and from the examples we see up there is that we can essentially set a value and listen to onChange text. So it's very similar to the web input element. There it was just onChange, and then we could also bind the value. So let's do that. First of all, I'll register some state in this app component so that we can use two-way binding to also store the user input. I do this like in any React app because it's a normal React component in the end. I set up this state property using this modern JavaScript syntax of setting this up directly in the component itself, in the class itself. And there I will simply name this place name, and it's an empty string initially. On text input, I'll then bind the value to this state place name. And again, this is totally equal to what you know from web apps with React, just using React Native components here. I'll then also add a method to handle changes to the input. I'll name it place name changed handler and use this modern syntax for creating a method in the class by basically creating a property and assigning an arrow function as a value. I did cover this in my React complete guide in case you did take this. This simply creates a method where the JavaScript this keyword will always refer to the class. A problem you would have if you use the other method syntax, this one. If you use this syntax there, that this keyword will actually not refer to the class if this method would be triggered through an event. That's why I use the more modern syntax with the equal sign and the arrow function. Anyways, the goal here is to set the state to whatever the user entered. First of all, let's see what we actually get here as an event or as a value when we hook this up to the text input. So therefore, let's do one thing. Let's throw an alert where we output the event. Alert, not console log. You'll see why in a second. So we got this. Let's now connect it to the text input by adding the onChange text prop, which you saw in the documentation, and binding it to this placeNameChanged handler. And I'll also split this up over multiple lines to make it easier to read. Now with that, let's also assign some style so that we can see it. And style simply is a JavaScript object. So the outer curly braces tell React that some dynamic content is to follow. The inner ones are there to create a JavaScript object. And there, let's simply give this a width of 100. This will be 100 pixels, or maybe let's use 300. And let's give it a border color of black. The border syntax, where you just use border and then say 1 pixel solid black and so on, won't work here. So let's use border color black, and let's add border width 1 for 1 pixel. Let's save all that and go back to our app. Now it should reload automatically. In case it doesn't or you see some error, press Command R on the iOS app, and on Android Control M or Command M, and then reload manually. So you should see an input field here, and you can type in there. You should get an alert as you do so with the characters you typed. The text input will not be updated with your input because you don't have code to bind your text input the user enters back to the input. You don't have two-way binding set up. So let's quickly fix this. Let's go back to our code editor. Let's make sure that we don't just alert the event. We did this to see what's inside, right? And we saw it's the value itself. So it's actually the value the user entered. So let's not alert this, but let's instead call this setState. And there, let's set placeName equal to val, which is the value the user entered. And keep in mind, this all works like in normal React apps. It uses the default React features. So setState here works exactly as it does in a normal web React app. Save your changes and go back. And now if you type here, I still get the alert, so hot reloading not working that great. You might need to turn on live reload too, and you can always reload manually, of course. So let's do that quickly. And I will say that React Native sometimes has its edges during development. So definitely reload your app if you see something strange. Feel free to kill this process here in the console and restart it if you, so rerun npm run Android or iOS if you got problems. Sometimes that fixes the issue. So here, what I can now do is I can type and you see the output in the input here. You also see that you get very minimal styling out of the box. For Android, you at least got this colored underline here, but besides that, there isn't much you get. So React Native, in general, doesn't provide you with a lot of built-in styles. This input style is relatively ugly though. So let's see what else we can change about this input and how we can style it in the next lecture.